They were still laughing when the first head exploded. Purple mist sprayed across the snow, and the jeers stopped like someone had yanked the audio feed. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was terrified. The kind of silence that asks a question: did that rusted thing just fire a clean shot through 7 inches of Galactic armor? And the answer, lying in pieces 10 meters away, was yes. Yes, it damn well did. Grady Vox stood there, not with pride, but mostly with disbelief that Betsy still worked. The sniper rifle, patched together with duct tape and spite, let out a high-pitched wheeze like a death rattle. Grady patted it like an old dog and muttered, "Atta girl," before crouching behind a jagged chunk of ice and reloading with numb fingers. The cold on Ira 9 didn't feel like Earth's cold. It felt alien, sharp, personal. It got in your joints and whispered in your bones, telling you that you didn't belong here. Which, to be fair, Grady didn't. The Galactic War Games were supposed to be a grand display of interstellar power, pageantry, and genetically perfected athleticism. The best of the galaxy's elite species came to flaunt their enhanced physiques, gravity-defying agility, and oversized egos. Then there was Grady, 100% human, 70% caffeine, and roughly 30% regret. He hadn't been invited. He'd been drafted. A clerical error somewhere in the orbiting bureaucracy mistook Earth War veteran as Earth War celebrity. And now here he was, knee-deep in snow and surrounded by 9-foot glowing gladiators with vendettas and sponsors. Above the ice plains, drones buzzed around capturing every moment for the intergalactic audience, panning in on Grady's grizzled face and frostbitten fingers. The commentators, whose species had never experienced cold or war, were losing their minds. "Oh! That's a confirmed kill! The human has taken out Threxilian the Tall! We did not have that in our bracket!" One shrieked in a voice that sounded like 2 cats playing a theremin. Inside Grady's helmet, a synthetic voice piped up. Deborah, his assigned combat AI, carried the tone of someone who'd once read a motivational poster and hated every word. "Well, statistically, this is where you die. Again. For real this time." Grady spat into the snow. "Put a sock in it, Deborah. If I had feet, I'd walk out of this farce. Your heart rate is through the roof, your hands are shaking, and that rifle looks like a prop from a historical reenactment. Still works. Miraculously." From across the arena, shimmering figures began to advance, slow, deliberate, their arrogance still intact but now balanced with caution. The elites had laughed when Grady fell face first into the snow during the initial drop. They'd howled when they saw Betsy strapped to his back like a museum exhibit. One even asked if it was decorative. Now, with one of their own sprawled headless on the ice, the mockery had dried up faster than water on a desert moon. Grady checked his ammo. 3 rounds. That was it. Not 3 full clips. Not 3 energy cores. 3 actual, physical rounds, polished and packed back when humans still watched television on flat screens. He was a museum piece carrying a relic, and now, apparently, a threat. The ice cracked under something massive approaching. Grady turned, rifle raised, breath shallow. It wasn't an elite. It was the terrain shifting. The war games were designed not just to pit warriors against each other, but against nature itself. The snowfield cracked open to reveal jagged crevasses and sudden geysers of freezing mist. Grady stumbled back as a pillar of blue steam erupted beside him, nearly taking his eyebrows with it. "Environmental hazard detected," Deborah chirped helpfully. "No kidding!" One of the Galactic twins, 6-armed and scaly, leapt the fissure with graceful ease, landing 10 feet from Grady. Her name was Iska, or maybe Orska. He couldn't remember, and didn't care. She had plasma spears and a face like a disappointed gym coach. "You should not be here, human," she hissed in perfect English, probably learned just to taunt him. Grady aimed Betsy at her chest. "Neither should you. Planet's clearly closed for snow maintenance." She snarled, lunging, but before she reached him, Grady pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. A dry, useless click. "Oh, come on," he muttered, whacking the rifle with his gloved hand. Deborah sighed. Betsy has entered emotional shutdown. Is that a real thing? Apparently. Iska grinned and lunged. Grady dodged just in time, slipping on the ice and going down hard. She raised her spear to skewer him, but her foot hit a tripwire, a string of microfilaments he'd laid down hours ago while pretending to, accidentally, fall repeatedly. There was a snap, a whir, and a small metal ball shot up from under the snow, exploded midair, and covered her in a net of electrified microcables. She screamed, convulsed, and dropped to the ground in a smoking heap. Grady winced. Always test your footing in new terrain. Deborah was silent for a long beat. Then, you are somehow both the dumbest and most statistically improbable creature I've ever assisted. Thanks, sweetheart. From a nearby ridge, more elites watched with growing concern. Their betting pools had been decimated. The human was supposed to die in round 1. Now round 1 was his playground. Grady didn't waste a moment. He grabbed Betsy, gave her a quick shake, and the rifle sputtered back to life with a wheeze and a sad metallic whimper. That's my girl, he said, aiming at the next target in the distance. Let's make the rich folks cry. And he fired. The wind on Ira 9 wasn't a breeze. It was a full-blown slap in the face with a fist made of frozen razors. Grady Vox didn't mind it much anymore. After a few hours outside in this hellhole, your skin went numb, your nose gave up, and your ears became decorative. What he did mind was the way the snow kept making sounds that weren't snow sounds. Like now, for instance, as he crouched in a half-frozen ditch next to the smoking remains of an elite, he swore he heard, giggling. It wasn't human. It was high-pitched, musical, and thoroughly out of place. He peeked over the edge of the snowbank and spotted 2 elites, twins, watching him from behind a transparent glacier wall. They were dressed in shimmering skin-tight armor that somehow shimmered in a place with no light. Their names were already trending across the galaxy. The twins from Seraphix. Famous for synchronized kills and victory dances that ended with the opponent's helmet as a hat. They looked at Grady like a pair of kids who had found a wounded bug and were deciding whether to burn it or poke it with a stick. One made a gun with her fingers and pointed it at him, mouthing pew-pew. The other mimed slipping on ice and dramatically falling over, which would have been hilarious if it hadn't been Grady's actual intro to the games. He rolled his eyes and whispered, mostly to himself, "Yeah, go ahead and laugh. It's what gets you killed." Deborah responded in his ear with her usual deadpan charm. "They're calculating angles and waiting for wind drop-off. They'll strike simultaneously. Probably aim for your femoral arteries for added drama." "Thanks, Deborah. Just what I needed. A reminder I'm not just going to die, I'm going to die stylishly." He didn't have time to relocate. No time to reload Betsy again either. She had just finished her last successful shot by coughing out a chunk of shrapnel and vibrating like a haunted fridge. He needed a distraction, a delay, a miracle. What he had was a snowman. Built it hours ago, just to keep himself sane. A lopsided lump with plasma grenade eyes and a mop handle for a nose. Now it was sitting right next to where he'd hidden some old world trip mines. Grady stood slowly, careful not to draw attention, and tossed his last ration bar toward the snowman. The twins flinched, then laughed again. One raised her arm and launched a telekinetic spear straight at the snowman's head. It made impact. The explosion was not beautiful. It was ugly, raw, and loud. Flames shot out in every direction, snow erupted in a blinding wave, and the glacier cracked from the force. Both twins were tossed into the air like dolls. Grady ran, sliding down the slope, ducking behind frozen rocks as debris rained from above. One of the twins was still moving, dragging herself along the ice, half her armor melted off. She looked up at him with rage and pain and disbelief, all crashing together behind glowing blue eyes. "You cheated," she hissed. Grady raised Betsy, who gave a shaky, elderly whine. "No such thing as cheating when everyone thinks you're already dead." He fired. It wasn't a clean shot. It hit her shoulder, spun her sideways, and probably didn't kill her. But it bought time. And time was the one thing no one got in this game for free. Back at the commentary booth orbiting high above Ira 9, chaos reigned. The broadcast was on a 10-second delay, but even that couldn't censor the disbelief pouring out of the announcers. He did it again! The human has just incapacitated the Seraphix twins with, is that a snowman? Unbelievable tactics. Highly unorthodox. Possibly illegal. Definitely hilarious. Viewership on Cornet just doubled. They're calling him the Frostbite Phantom. Grady would have laughed if his lungs weren't freezing. He found temporary shelter inside a downed transport pod, using the busted hull as a shield against the wind. He pulled his gloves off, checked the status of his fingers, still attached, mostly pink, and turned his attention to Betsy. The rifle wasn't doing great. The barrel had a visible crack, the scope was fogged from the inside, and every time he cocked it, it made a sound like a smoker clearing his throat. Deborah, how bad is she? She's 90% broken and 10% spite. Not unlike you, really. Can she shoot? One more time, probably. Maybe. Assuming you don't breathe too hard. He sighed, closing his eyes for a second. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear war cries, alien tones that vibrated in a way Bones didn't like. The others would be coming now. The surviving elites, the high rankers, the ones who saw him not as a joke but a threat to their shiny perfect image. He'd humiliated them on a galactic stage. That wasn't going to go unnoticed. A beeping alert in his helmet flashed. A bounty had been posted. Grady Vox, 250,000 gallons creds. Alive or broken into decorative pieces. His face appeared next to it, frozen mid-yawn from some old military photo. Congratulations, Deborah said. You're officially unpopular. Grady gave a dry laugh, then stopped when it hurt. Was never that popular to begin with. But damn, they must really want me off this rock. They want the narrative back under control. You were supposed to die for comic relief. Now you're the protagonist. Footsteps crunched outside the pod. Grady didn't breathe. A shadow passed over the opening, huge, misshapen. He reached for his last weapon, an old flare gun. Useless in combat, but useful for blinding, distracting, or, if pointed the wrong way, lighting your beard on fire. He took a chance. Fired straight up into the shadow's face. The flare burst with an angry red flash, illuminating a monstrous elite, 10 feet tall, spiked shoulders, glowing runes down his arms. The thing roared, grabbing at its eyes as Grady bolted out the other side of the pod, sliding over ice, not stopping until he reached the edge of a cliff. He looked down. Bad idea. It was a sheer drop into darkness. No bottom in sight. No alternate routes. No backup. Suggestions? He asked Deborah. Statistically, jumping results in 89% mortality. And the other 11? Mostly landing on something soft and screaming. The roar came again, closer now. He had no real choice. Well, Grady muttered. If I don't make it, tell Betsy I'm sorry for all the things I said about her weight. And he jumped. The wind ripped the scream out of his mouth before he could get it out properly. He didn't hit the bottom. Not at first. What he hit was a ledge about 20 feet down, face first, ribs second, and pride somewhere far, far after. It wasn't the soft landing Deborah promised, but it beat falling forever. Grady groaned, rolling onto his back, blinking snow out of his eyelashes as the sky above flickered with aurora flashes and war drones zipping overhead like angry insects. Somewhere far above, the elite he'd blinded roared again, its voice echoing down the chasm like a furious opera singer looking for an encore. Grady didn't move. Not because he couldn't, although every part of him loudly protested the idea, but because he was laughing. Quiet at first, then louder, until his lungs gave up and he was just wheezing into the cold. Something funny? Deborah asked, her voice crackling with static from the fall. Yeah, he gasped. I think I broke my spleen on a frozen sandwich someone left here. Either that or I found the galaxy's first snow mattress. Statistically, you should be dead. You keep refusing to meet expectations. Story of my life. He sat up slowly, checking for broken bones, twisted joints, or signs of brain leakage. Everything seemed functional. Barely. Betsy had landed beside him, her barrel bent in a way that suggested retirement. He sighed and slung her over his shoulder anyway. Couldn't leave her behind. They'd been through too much now. They were practically married. The ledge he'd landed on appeared to be part of an old structure, half buried under the snow and ice, mostly intact, which meant it had to be ancient. Probably from the early days of the war games, when safety regulations hadn't yet been reduced to good luck. Grady followed a cracked metallic corridor into what looked like a forgotten maintenance station. It was quiet, dark, and blessedly out of the wind. Inside, he found a cracked terminal with some leftover supplies, a few glowing fungus patches on the wall, and something even more surprising, company. The creature sitting near a heat vent was gelatinous. Not in a gross way, but in a kind of semi-transparent shimmer, like someone had poured courage and cowardice into the same mold, and gave it googly eyes. It blinked at Grady. "Hi," it said, voice soft, pleasant, and not at all murdery. Grady stared. "What in the cold hell are you supposed to be?" "I'm tough," it said proudly. "I'm a pacifist." Grady blinked. "In the war games?" "Yes. I came here to hide and wait for everyone else to die. So far, it's going well." Grady laughed, coughed, then sat beside Toph. "Name's Grady. I'm not a pacifist. I'm just out of options." Toph offered him a cup of something warm and faintly green. It smelled like moss and childhood fear. Grady drank it anyway. It helped. They were joined an hour later by another contestant, one Grady had seen in passing during the drop but hadn't thought would last this long. A tall, bird-like alien with a hat shaped suspiciously like a cowboy's and a gun belt made entirely of bones. He stomped in dramatically, wings fluttering, head tilting like he was trying to find the light for a close-up. "You must be the human," he said in a gruff, twangy voice that sounded like an AI impersonating Clint Eastwood. "I must be," Grady said, not blinking. "I'm Vrivri. I like Earth westerns. All of them. Even the terrible ones." Grady nodded slowly. "That explains the hat." Vrivri took it as a compliment. "Saw you up there. You made quite a mess." Grady shrugged. "Wasn't aiming for a mess. Just trying not to die." "Well," Vrivri said, "you failed at staying low, but you're making fans." Deborah chimed in, because she couldn't resist. "You're trending on Cornet's top 10. Hashtags include Sniper Grandpa, Human Chaos, and disturbingly, Betsy Bay. Why do I feel like I'm going to regret all of this?" Grady muttered. Outside, the storm intensified. The three of them stayed in the makeshift shelter, sharing war stories, bad jokes, and what little supplies they had. Grady, against all odds, found himself not hating it. Toph had a dry, nervous sense of humor that contrasted perfectly with Vrivri's dramatic flair. They were ridiculous. Misfits. Survivors, not because they were the best, but because they were stubborn, weird, and just clever enough. Then the signal came. A blaring alert in every helmet, every device, every surviving player's neural link. The final round was approaching. The top 5 contestants were summoned to the Glass Veil Ridge, the highest, deadliest point on Iron, where the wind was sharp enough to slice skin and visibility dropped to near zero. And waiting for them there would be the Gilded. The top 3 elites. Genetic marvels with custom weaponry, armies of fanatics, and egos the size of dwarf planets. They hadn't bothered showing up before because they hadn't seen anyone as a threat. But now Grady wasn't just a problem. He was an embarrassment. "I hate that name," Grady said when he saw the roster. "The Gilded. Sounds like a boy band with swords." "They're worse," Deborah replied. "And they're pissed. You broke the narrative." Vrivri drew both his pistols, twirled them, and nodded solemnly. "Then let's go write a new one." Toph shivered. "I'd really rather not." Grady stood, stretched, and looked out toward the storm. He didn't know if they could win. Didn't know if Betsy would fire again. Didn't know if his spine would hold up through another fall, another hit, another ambush. But something had shifted. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to remind every smirking alien with a sponsorship deal that humans didn't need perfection to be dangerous. They just needed a reason. So he stepped into the storm with his misfit crew, the broken rifle on his back, and a look in his eyes that didn't say confidence, but something sharper. Resolve. A quiet, angry kind of fire that didn't burn out. Not easily. Behind him, Toph whined. We're all going to die, aren't we? Grady didn't look back. Yeah. But not before they remember who we were. The ridge looked like the kind of place even death avoided. Wind screamed across jagged ice cliffs, slicing through armor like it was cloth, and visibility barely stretched 5 feet ahead. Every breath was a gamble, every step a prayer. Glass Veil Ridge had claimed hundreds over the years, elites, legends, monsters. Now it would host its strangest contestants yet, a half-frozen human with a broken sniper rifle, a gelatinous pacifist trembling in the cold, and a gunslinging bird who thought he was starring in a spaghetti western. Grady didn't say much as they climbed the final slope. Words felt small now. The kind of quiet that sat in his chest wasn't fear. It was weight. Like all the mocking, all the odds stacked against him, all the bodies left in the snow had built up into something solid. He wasn't climbing to win anymore. He was climbing because they had dared to laugh. Toph slipped and squealed, his jelly-like form flopping onto the ice with a pathetic squelch. Riri caught him, grumbling something about how sidekicks were supposed to be more heroic. Grady ignored them both, eyes focused on the structure ahead. The summit platform. The Gilded's throne room. If arrogance had a shape, it was this place: metallic gold arches, holographic banners fluttering in the wind, and 3 massive thrones carved from obsidian and vanity. The Gilded stood waiting. One towered with molten armor and skin that glowed like embers, breathing steam with every exhale. Another was thin and serpentine, wearing a crown of needles and a sneer that could crack glass. The third, at the center, didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone made the air heavier, like a gravity well of condescension. The leader of the trio, known only as Caladrax. Grady stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his boots, Betsy slung over his shoulder like a ghost of wars past. Caladrax tilted his head slightly, studying Grady with the curiosity of a scientist examining a germ that somehow developed a sense of humor. You, Caladrax said, his voice slow, rich, and endlessly amused. The human. The joke. Grady shrugged. Heard the same thing in boot camp. Still outlived my CO. You should not be here. The tall one with ember armor growled. You've humiliated our kind. I haven't even started, Grady replied. The Gilded didn't rush. They didn't need to. They were spectacle incarnate. This was the final round, and every camera in orbit was tuned in. Viewers across the galaxy waited for the human to finally get what he deserved. To be put down. Silenced. The narrative corrected. But Grady didn't move like someone on borrowed time. He moved like someone who'd stopped caring what happened next. Then the first strike came. The serpentine Gilded launched forward, blades extending from her arms like silver wings. Riri leapt into action, drawing his pistols and firing midair. The bullets didn't pierce the armor, but they distracted her long enough for Grady to duck and roll. Toph screamed and flopped into a defensive blob, his gelatinous form absorbing shockwaves from the Ember Gilded's molten hammer. It was chaos. A lopsided fight in every way. The elites had power, numbers, style. Grady's team had panic, grit, and an aging rifle that hadn't fired in hours. Then, something changed. Betsy shook on Grady's back. Not from damage. From something deeper. Like awakening. Deborah's voice filled his helmet, not sarcastic this time, but steady. Focused. There's something I didn't tell you, she said. Betsy wasn't just a rifle. She was a prototype. Human-made. Experimental. Powered by neural sync. What does that mean? Grady asked, ducking a swipe from a spear that nearly took his ear off. It means if you connect me directly to your nervous system, I might be able to fire one more shot. The last one. You're talking about plugging an ancient AI into my brain during a life-or-death battle. Yes. You should have opened with that 3 days ago. It was classified. He hesitated. Only for a second. Then he yanked off the external link cable, jammed it into the port near his neck, and bit down as Deborah surged into his nervous system like lightning. The world changed. He saw trajectories. Heat signatures. Weak points in armor. Emotional spikes. Fear, arrogance, doubt. It all lit up. Time slowed, not literally, but enough to matter. He raised Betsy. The crack in her barrel shimmered, but the rifle stabilized. It felt like holding memory. Rage. Purpose. He aimed at Caladrax. And fired. The shot didn't sound like metal. It sounded like thunder giving a eulogy. The recoil slammed Grady backward. Caladrax didn't move until the glow in his chest flickered. Then dimmed. Then went dark. The Gilded leader staggered, looking down at the smoking crater in his chest, as if surprised to discover he wasn't invincible. He collapsed with a sound like a collapsing statue, face first into the snow. The silence was unbearable. Then the Ember Gilded screamed and charged. Riri met him with a war cry that belonged in a much better movie, diving into combat with pistols blazing. Toph threw himself in the way of the serpent, taking blow after blow to protect Grady, his gelatin quivering with every impact until, finally, it stopped moving. Grady dragged himself up. Blood in his mouth. Pain in every joint. But he stood. And when he pointed Betsy, still smoking, at the last two Gilded, they hesitated. That was the turning point. They ran. Not far. Not fast. But they retreated. And the final round ended. Broadcasts across the galaxy glitched, tried to spin it, tried to edit it. But the raw feed went viral. The human. The relic. The underdog. The joke who ended the game. Grady didn't remember much after that. Just being pulled out of the snow by medics who looked confused. Deborah humming softly in his head. Riri carrying Toph's remains like a folded flag. Betsy finally falling silent. Weeks later, he sat on a transport ship heading back to somewhere he hadn't decided yet. A general from some high council tried to award him a medal. Grady threw it into his soup. He didn't want glory. He just wanted people to remember. Not him. Not Betsy. Not even Deborah. But the fact that when the perfect laughed at the broken still got to shoot back. And sometimes they didn't miss. He never liked hospitals. Even alien ones, with walls that smelled like citrus and humming lights that read your vitals before you walked in, felt the same in all the wrong ways. Too clean. Too quiet. Too much time to think. Grady sat in a recovery chair that adjusted itself every 10 minutes like it knew better than he did. One arm was wrapped from wrist to elbow in regeneration mesh, and he was pretty sure 3 of his ribs had been replaced with something flexible and disturbingly warm. His boots sat beside the chair, covered in dried snow and victory. Across from him was a glass window that looked out onto the stars, millions of them glittering like tiny lies. He'd stared at them for hours. They didn't blink back. A nurse drone floated by, offered him something called a calming snack, that looked like green jelly in a tube, and hovered impatiently when he ignored it. He waved it off and leaned back, closing his eyes. The mission was over. The war games were done. The elites had gone home in disgrace. Some of them had tried to challenge the outcome, say it was unfair, say the human cheated. The footage said otherwise. So did the fact that the crowd, the actual galactic population, had taken to chanting his name like it meant something. Not a lot of people knew what to do with that. Grady least of all. He hadn't gone into that frozen hellscape to become a hero. He'd gone in because someone pushed the wrong button on a roster. And yet here he was, being hailed as the icon of unpredictability. The symbol of defiance. The meatbag who punched back at gods. He would have preferred a nap. Deborah was quiet now. Not gone. Just sleeping, maybe. The neural link had been removed with the care and delicacy of someone disabling a bomb. There'd been damage. Minor, they said. Reversible. But Grady felt it in the corners of his thoughts, an echo where her sarcasm used to be. He missed her voice. Not because it was comforting, but because it was the only voice that never lied to him. The door to his room hissed open, and Riri stepped in wearing a new coat and his same old hat. The bird alien looked slightly cleaner, but no less dramatic. He gave Grady a two-fingered salute and perched on the edge of the table like it was a barstool in some dusty cantina. "They're naming a stadium after you," he said without preamble. Grady opened one eye. "That's a bad idea." "Agreed. But it's already trending. They going to turn me into an action figure too?" "Already did. Your rifle's detachable. Says bang when you press the button." Grady groaned and dropped his head back against the chair. "God help us." Riri tilted his head. "You're not taking victory very well." "I didn't win anything," Grady said. "I survived. There's a difference. You changed the narrative. That's bigger than a win. You embarrassed the people who thought they owned the story." Grady looked out at the stars again. "And now what? They learn their lesson? Start treating underdogs with respect?" "Not likely," Riri admitted. "But they'll think twice before laughing at the next human who walks into the ring." That got a small smile out of Grady. Just enough to sting the scar on his lip. The door opened again, and Toph rolled in, well, part of him. A third of his original mass had been lost in the final battle, but what remained had been reshaped into a vaguely cube-like form with stubby limbs and a cheerful bounce. Grady blinked. "Toph, you look like a gummy bear that went to war." Toph jiggled proudly. "I got a medal. And a scholarship." "For what?" "Nonviolent conflict theory." Grady chuckled, shaking his head. The universe, apparently, had a dark sense of humor. A few hours later, they left the hospital and stepped into the landing bay where transport shuttles waited like bored vultures. Grady had been offered passage anywhere he wanted. The council practically begged him to visit Earth, let them parade him through cities he hadn't seen in decades, show off the relic-turned legend. He'd said no. Too much noise. Instead, he picked a small planet near the edge of known space. Quiet, cold, and utterly irrelevant. Just the way he liked it. As they approached the shuttle, a group of children ran up, alien kids, different shapes and sizes, all laughing and pointing. "Are you the sniper man?" one asked, eyes wide. Grady knelt down. "That depends. Did he look incredibly tired and fed up with all this attention?" They giggled. One held out a toy version of Betsy. It made a squeaky sound instead of a shot. Grady took it, turned it over in his hands, then looked at the kid. "You know this thing only fires when you believe in impossible odds, right?" The child nodded solemnly. "I believe." He handed it back and stood. "Then keep it safe." The shuttle door opened with a hiss. Grady stepped in last, turning back once to see the crowd watching, waving. He didn't wave back. Didn't need to. As the shuttle lifted off, the stars opened up in front of them like a map of unwritten endings. Inside, Toph was already playing some kind of galactic board game with himself, and still losing. Riri leaned back, boots up, whistling the theme from an old Earth Western. And Grady just sat, watching the stars slide by, wondering what would come next. He wasn't a hero. Not in the way they wanted him to be. He was a warning, carved into the ice with grit and stubbornness. A reminder that when you laugh at someone who's got nothing to lose, you might just be the punchline. And in a galaxy ruled by perfection, nothing scared them more than an old man with a rusted sniper and something to prove.